The architecture of a legend is often built on the ruins of the foolish. In the National Basketball Association, there is a currency more valuable than championship rings, more liquid than sneaker endorsements, and more enduring than statistics. It is the currency of absolute, unshakable fear. To be feared in the NBA is to own the real estate of your opponent's mind before the ball is even tipped. It is a psychological dominance that precedes physical talent, a psychic weight that slows the heart rate of the defender and accelerates the panic of the offensive player. There is no man in the history of the sport who weaponized this fear more effectively, more clinically, and more mercilessly than Michael Jordan. And there is no story that illustrates the cost of ignoring this reality quite like the tale of the $50,000 bet, a moment that stands as a singular, horrific lesson in hubris. To understand the wreckage that occurred that day, you have to understand the mind of the rookie. We are talking about Ron Harper. At this juncture in his professional timeline, Harper was not the savvy, defensive-minded veteran who would later become a crucial component of championship-winning Bulls teams. No, the version of Ron Harper in this story was the young, explosive, physically gifted, and dangerously arrogant prospect who had just entered the league with the conviction that the hierarchy of the NBA was a myth designed to keep young players compliant. He was long, he was incredibly fast, he possessed a wingspan that could disrupt passing lanes, and he had a vertical leap that allowed him to play above the rim. He looked at the league and he saw not gods but peers. He saw not titans but matchups. And in that fatal, beautiful arrogance, he looked at Michael Jordan, the man who was already ascending to a status of basketball deity, and saw only a challenge. The setting was the Chicago Bulls' practice facility. This was not a place of glamour, it was a place of work. It was a concrete-walled, high-ceilinged cathedral of sweat, echoing with the rhythmic, hypnotic, and brutal sounds of professional-level basketball. The air was heavy, recycled, and sharp with the scent of floor wax and the metallic tang of exertion. It was the place where Jordan didn't just practice, he prepared for war. Every dribble was an execution, every jump shot was a statement. And in this facility, hierarchy was absolute. The veterans moved with purpose, the role players moved with caution. And the rookies, they moved with the silent understanding that they were merely bodies in the room, there to assist in the sharpening of the blade. But Ron Harper in his youth did not respect the silence. He was, by all accounts, a talker. He was the kind of player who needed the noise to feel the game. He needed the verbal back and forth, the chirping, the constant friction, to find his rhythm. On this particular day, the energy in the gym was dense. Jordan was locked in, his face a mask of total, terrifying concentration. He was working on his footwork, moving with a grace that bordered on the liquid, a predator stalking unseen prey. Harper, perhaps fueled by a mixture of adrenaline, youthful ignorance, and a desperate internal need to prove he belonged, decided to break the silence. He decided to poke the bear. "You're not moving as fast as they say, Mike," Harper remarked, his voice cutting through the hum of the gym. It was a challenge, a direct, blatant, and utterly foolish challenge. The entire gym seemed to physically pause. The trainers, the ball boys, the other players, they all froze. They knew. They had seen the look in Jordan's eyes before. They knew the shift that occurred when the competitive switch was flipped. It was a shift from the calm, focused professional to the cold, calculating assassin. Jordan stopped his movement. He didn't explode with rage. He didn't shout. He stood perfectly still, the basketball resting on his hip. He looked at Harper with an expression that was, for lack of a better word, curious. It was the look of a scientist who had just found a bug in his experiment. "You think so, Ron?" Jordan asked. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, yet it possessed a weight that made the floorboard seem to vibrate. "I know so," Harper doubled down, feeding off the attention. "I'm telling you, I've got your number. I know how you play, I've watched the tapes, you're predictable. I bet you $50,000 you can't even score on me once. One-on-one, right here, right now. 50 grand says you can't get a bucket. $50,000. In the mid-1980s, that amount of money wasn't just cash, it was a salary, it was a life-altering sum. It was a stake that demanded respect. For a rookie to put that on the line against Michael Jordan was not just a bet, it was a declaration of war. It was the equivalent of walking into a lion's den, spitting in the lion's face, and betting him that he couldn't bite you. The gym had fallen into a state of absolute, pressurized vacuum. You could hear the hum of the overhead lights. You could hear the distant traffic outside. Everyone was looking at Jordan, waiting for the explosion. But Jordan didn't explode. He simply bounced the ball once, the sound echoing like a gunshot, and nodded. 50,000, Jordan said. "You're on." He didn't need to ask for a witness. He didn't need to sign a contract. The sanctity of the game was the contract. He walked to the top of the key. He didn't even take off his warm-up shirt. He just stood there, waiting for Harper to get into a defensive stance. This is where the story shifts from a petty locker room dispute into an act of sustained, systematic deconstruction. Most people, when they hear the story, assume Jordan hit a three-pointer in Harper's face, or perhaps a thunderous dunk. They assume the points came from some singular, spectacular highlight. But that was not Jordan's way. Jordan's way was to show you exactly how he was going to kill you, and then kill you exactly that way, every single time, until you stopped breathing. He was going to expose every single flaw in Harper's defense. He was going to turn Harper's own defensive philosophy against him. He was going to teach him that basketball is not just a game of speed. It is a game of angles, patience, and absolute, devastating will. The first possession started with a standard hesitation. Jordan drifted left, his body language suggesting a drive to the hoop. Harper, long and rangy, shifted his weight to cut off the baseline. He was fast. He was excited. He was playing the defense he had practiced his entire life. But Jordan didn't drive. He pulled back, his feet setting into the concrete of the gym floor, and rose for a mid-range jumper. It was a routine, fundamental shot. The net snapped with a dry, violent sound. 2-0. Harper grabbed the ball, his face a mix of frustration and stubbornness. "Lucky shot," he muttered, as if he had to convince himself. Jordan didn't respond. He didn't gloat. He simply defended the next possession, forced a tough shot, and reclaimed the ball. The second possession was a masterclass in the jab step. Jordan jabbed right. Harper lunged. Jordan didn't move. Harper recovered, but the space had already been created. Jordan rose again. Swish. 4-0. By the fifth possession, the gym had turned into a theater of the macabre. The other players were huddled on the sidelines, whispering, not daring to make a sound. They were watching a man be dismantled in real time. Jordan was scoring in ways that made it seem as if the defensive player wasn't even there. He was using the pump fake to send Harper flying into the air, only to wait for him to land before sinking a lazy, uncontested jumper. He was using his shoulder to lean into Harper, creating space with a subtle, professional push that the referees would never call. He was using his eyes, looking left when he intended to go right, manipulating Harper's nervous system. It was the Jordan flu of defense for Harper. He was reacting, not playing. He was chasing, not guarding. And Jordan was operating at a speed that was not physical but temporal. He seemed to exist a second before Harper did. When Harper moved, Jordan had already moved. When Harper reached, Jordan had already retracted. By the time the hypothetical halftime approached, Jordan had reached 40 points. 40. In a one-on-one practice session, scoring 40 points against a high-level defender who is trying, with everything he has, to stop you is not a game. It is an assault. The scoring run was a repetitive, brutal loop of humiliation. First, the post-up. Jordan backed Harper down. Every dribble was a physical statement, a reminder of the weight differential. Harper tried to use his strength, but Jordan was a wall of muscle. He spun, the signature turnaround fadeaway, and the ball kissed the glass. 10 number. Next, the drive. Harper played him close, trying to be aggressive. Jordan caught the ball, didn't even put it on the floor, and simply exploded. His first step was a blur, a chemical reaction of explosive potential. He was past Harper before the rookie's brain could even register the movement. Dunk. 12-double. Then, the steal. On the defensive end, Jordan stopped playing the role of the scorer and began playing the role of the predator. He knew exactly what Harper was going to do before Harper did it. He baited the rookie into a pass, jumped the lane, and cruised for a layup. 14-SO. It wasn't just the scoring, it was the nature of the scoring. Jordan was experimenting on Harper. He was testing different moves to see how Harper would react. He was playing with him, like a cat with a wounded bird. He would make a move, watch Harper fail to stop it, and then execute that same move again and again and again, until Harper was so mentally frazzled that he couldn't stop even the most basic plays. The silence in the gym was the loudest sound of all. It wasn't the silence of respect, it was the silence of fear. Everyone in that gym knew that if they were in Harper's position, they would have folded, walked off the court, and turned in their jersey. They were witnessing the emergence of a man who did not care about the bet. He did not care about the $50,000. He was playing for something much higher. He was playing for the absolute, unquestioned sovereignty of his own space. Ron Harper, the brash rookie, the loud talker, the man who had walked in with his chest puffed out and his head high, was now a shell. He was sweating, breathing in heavy, panicked gasps. He was dragging his feet. He wasn't even trying to contest the shots anymore. He was just trying to survive the next possession without being embarrassed even further. He realized, in the most painful way possible, that the gap between him and the man in front of him wasn't just a matter of skill. It was a matter of existence. It was the gap between a basketball player and a force of nature. When Jordan hit his 40th point, a thunderous, rim-rattling dunk that seemed to shake the very foundations of the practice facility, he stopped. He let the ball bounce away and he looked at Harper. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't say, "You're soft." He didn't even smile. He simply stared at him with that same cold, terrifying curiosity he had possessed at the beginning of the bet. "You want to keep going, Ron?" Jordan asked. Harper, the rookie who had bet $50,000, the man who had promised to stop the greatest offensive force on the planet, could not even speak. He shook his head. He turned his back on Jordan, walked to his locker, and sat down. He didn't shower, he didn't stretch. He just sat there staring at the floor, the realization of what he had just witnessed settling into his bones. The $50,000 was never paid. Or perhaps it was, in the quiet, unspoken language of the NBA. Maybe the check was written, maybe it wasn't. It didn't matter. The money was a footnote. The real debt had been paid in full the moment Harper realized he was not playing against a man. He was playing against a standard. He was playing against a level of perfection that demanded absolute, unwavering, and eternal submission. But why did Jordan do it? Why not just ignore the rookie, as a superstar of his magnitude usually would? Why engage in such a brutal, unnecessary act of dominance? To understand Jordan, you have to understand the philosophy of the crucible. Jordan believed that the only way to forge greatness was to destroy everything that was weak. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to cleanse the environment. He wanted to make sure that everyone on that floor, from the bench warmers to the starters, understood exactly what was required to reach the top. He wanted to ensure that no one else in that locker room would ever think they were his equal. He was protecting his kingdom by demonstrating, with horrific clarity, the price of entry. This story is rarely told in the mainstream media because it makes people uncomfortable. It portrays a side of sports that we don't like to acknowledge. We like the heartwarming stories of underdogs. We like the narratives of teamwork and camaraderie. We don't like the stories of the absolute cold-blooded dictator who rules his kingdom with an iron fist. But this is the truth of the Jordan era. This is the reality of the dynasty. The Bulls weren't just a team, they were a collective expression of one man's will. And that will was tempered in moments like this. Moments where a rookie's hubris was met with such a profound, staggering, and violent rejection that it left him forever changed. If you are currently watching this video, if you are currently reading these words, take a moment to reflect on your own challenges. We all have our versions of Ron Harper. We all have those moments where we think, "I can take this, I can handle this. I am as good as they are," he. And sometimes, that arrogance is the fuel we need to grow. But other times, it is a blind spot that hides the reality of the mountain in front of us. We have to be honest with ourselves. We have to know when we are being tested by the gods. We have to know when we are standing in the presence of someone who has mastered the game, and we have to know when to listen, when to learn, and when to get out of the way. The story of Michael Jordan and Ron Harper is not just a basketball story. It is a story about the cost of clarity. It is a story about what happens when reality finally catches up to perception. It is a story about the man who was so driven, so obsessive, and so terrifyingly skilled that he could not allow a single doubt, a single challenge, or a single moment of disrespect to go unanswered. And as we analyze the anatomy of this event, we have to look at the mechanics of Jordan's scoring run again. It wasn't luck. It was the result of thousands of hours of repetitive, agonizing, boring work. Jordan didn't just wake up one morning and decide to drop 40 on a rookie in a practice session. He had spent years in the gym, alone, perfecting the exact arc of his shot, the exact timing of his dribble, and the exact placement of his feet. He had run the scenarios in his head a million times before he ever played them on the court. When Harper challenged him, Jordan wasn't improvising. He was accessing a library of pre-calculated, pre-verified solutions to the problem of defending him. The jab step, the hesitation, the post-up, the turnaround fadeaway. These were not random choices. They were the most efficient tools in his arsenal, and he utilized them with the precision of a surgeon. He didn't waste energy. He didn't play flashily. He played efficiently. He wanted to win, and he wanted to win by the widest possible margin, with the least amount of wasted motion. The psychological aftermath for Ron Harper was, by all accounts, transformative. He didn't quit. He didn't run away. He eventually became a vital part of the Bulls' championship run. But he was a different player. He was a player who understood his role. He was a player who had seen the top of the mountain and realized he would never be the king of it. He accepted his place in the ecosystem of greatness, and in doing so, he found his own path to success. He learned to channel his defensive energy, his speed, and his athleticism into the service of the machine rather than the service of his ego. And that is the final, hidden, and perhaps most important lesson of the $50,000 bet. It was not just an act of destruction, it was an act of integration. By breaking the rookie, Jordan had prepared him for the journey. He had stripped away the delusions, the ego, and the arrogance, leaving behind the raw material of a professional who could contribute to a winning culture. It was a harsh, unforgiving, and cruel initiation, but it was an initiation nonetheless. In the modern era of the NBA, we are so concerned with the comfort of our players. We worry about their mental health, their public image, and their emotional well-being. And while those things are important, we must also acknowledge the value of the fire. We must acknowledge that the elite, the very top tier of human performance, often requires a level of intensity that is difficult for us to understand. We live in a world of participation trophies and soft landings, but the world of the absolute elite, the world of Michael Jordan, is a world of concrete, steel, and total commitment. So the next time you see a highlight of Jordan, the next time you see him rising up for that fadeaway, the next time you see him locking down a defender, remember the story of the $50,000 bet. Remember the cold silence of the practice facility. Remember the man who was so terrified of being ordinary that he was willing to do the extraordinary every single day, against every single opponent, regardless of the stakes, regardless of the venue, and regardless of who was watching. Remember that greatness is not just a gift, it is a choice. It is a choice made every single day, in the quiet, empty hours, against the rookie, against the veteran, and against the world. It is the choice to be relentless. It is the choice to be unstoppable. And, most importantly, it is the choice to ensure that whenever anyone dares to bet against you, they learn exactly why they were wrong to do so. Now, as we conclude this deep dive, let's take a final look at the implications of this story for our own lives. We aren't all going to be Michael Jordan. We aren't all going to drop 40 points in a practice session on a challenge. But we all have the ability to commit to our craft with the same level of intensity. We all have the ability to prepare for the challenges that come our way. We all have the ability to anticipate the jabs of life and to respond with the calculated precision of a master. The challenge of Ron Harper was not a burden for Jordan, it was an opportunity. It was an opportunity to reaffirm his status, to test his own skills, and to send a message that would resonate throughout the organization. When you are faced with a challenge, how do you respond? Do you fold? Do you complain? Do you make excuses? Or do you see it as an opportunity to sharpen your blade? Do you see it as an opportunity to show the world, and more importantly, to show yourself, exactly what you're capable of? The story of the $50,000 bet is a story of total, unequivocal, and absolute confidence. It is a story of a man who looked into the abyss, looked into the eyes of a young, hungry, arrogant challenger, and didn't blink. He didn't hesitate. He didn't worry about the money, he didn't worry about the optics, he simply stepped up and did what he was born to do. He played, he dominated, and he destroyed. And in doing so, he created a myth that will last as long as the game of basketball is played. He proved that even when you are the best, even when you have nothing left to prove, there's always a reason to be ready. Because the second you stop being ready is the second you become vulnerable. And for Michael Jordan, vulnerability was not an option. Vulnerability was not even a concept he understood. This story is a reminder that the giants we see on our screens were not born giants. They became giants. They were forged. They were tested. They were challenged by rookies who didn't know any better. And they survived those challenges not because they were lucky, but because they were prepared to turn every single act of disrespect into a lesson of dominance. If you take only one thing away from this narrative, let it be this: respect is not given, respect is earned. And it is earned in the most uncomfortable, the most stressful, and the most public of ways. It is earned when the pressure is on, when the stakes are high, and when everyone is watching to see if you will crack. The bet of $50,000 is long gone. The money is spent. The practice facility is likely renovated. The players have long since retired. But the lesson remains. And it remains as a chilling, powerful, and permanent testament to the power of the human will. It is a story about the absolute terrifying beauty of greatness and the uncompromising cost of mediocrity. In the final analysis, Michael Jordan didn't win the bet because he was the most talented player on the floor. He won the bet because he was the most prepared, the most disciplined, and the most absolutely violently competitive. He won the bet because he refused to accept that anyone could stand in his way. He won the bet because he was Michael Jordan, and in the world of basketball, that was and will always be the only argument that mattered. So, reflect on this. Who are you challenging today? Are you challenging yourself to be better? Or are you challenging someone else only to be humbled? Are you building your own legacy, or are you trying to tear down someone else's? The answers to these questions will define your own personal history. They will define the legacy you leave behind. And, if you are lucky, they might just lead you to your own version of the $50,000 moment. A moment where you can stand tall, face the challenge, and prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you are exactly who you claim to be. Let this be your motivation. Let this be your reminder. Let this be the story you tell yourself when the work gets hard, when the pressure mounts, and when the rookie in your life tries to tell you that you've lost your edge. Remember Jordan, remember the 40 points. And remember that the only person who can truly define your limits is you. The game is always on, the court is always waiting. And the question remains, are you ready to play? The echo of that practice session still resonates in the halls of basketball history. It serves as a reminder that the path to greatness is littered with the shattered egos of those who thought they could shortcut the process. Ron Harper thought he could shortcut the process. He thought he could arrive at the summit without climbing the mountain. He thought he could buy his way to the top with a bet. But the mountain does not care about your bets. The mountain does not care about your bank account. The mountain cares only about your resolve. When we look at the trajectory of the Bulls in the late 80s, we see the building blocks of a dynasty. We see the integration of individual brilliance into a collective power. But we also see the constant underlying tension of Jordan's standards. He was a tyrant of excellence. He demanded the same level of commitment from his teammates that he demanded from himself, and sometimes that demand came in the form of these brutal one-on-one sessions. He was not just playing against the rookie, he was playing against the potential for complacency. He was playing against the natural tendency of every human being to settle, to relax, to accept good enough. Jordan refused to accept good enough. He wanted perfection. And if he had to break a rookie's heart, or his pride, or his spirit, to get it, he would do so without a second thought. It was a cold, efficient, and ruthless approach to leadership, but it was an approach that produced results that the world had never seen before. We can learn from this, not by adopting the cruelty, but by adopting the standard. We can look at the Ron Harpers in our own lives, the things that challenge our focus, the things that threaten to distract us, the things that try to make us doubt our abilities, and we can use them as fuel. We can use them as an excuse to double down on our preparation, to refine our skills, and to sharpen our vision. The legacy of that 40-point practice session is not the humiliation of a rookie, it is the elevation of a standard. It is the reminder that if you want to be the best, you have to be willing to do things that others are not. You have to be willing to put in the time, to make the sacrifice, and to endure the pain. As we close this narrative, let us consider the nature of legends. Legends are not just stories we tell, they are roadmaps. They are guides for what is possible when the human spirit is pushed to the absolute limit. They are beacons that shine in the darkness, showing us the path forward and warning us of the cliffs that lie ahead. Michael Jordan is a legend not just because he won, but because he showed us what it looks like to live a life of total, uncompromising commitment. The $50,000 bet is just a moment in time. It is a grain of sand in the desert of history. But the spirit that drove that bet, that is eternal. That is the spirit of the champion. That is the spirit of the winner. And that is the spirit that resides within each and every one of us, waiting to be awakened. So, wake it up, awaken your greatness, awaken your resolve. Awaken your own personal Jordan and let it take the court. Because the world is waiting to see what you can do. The world is waiting to see how you will respond to the challenge. The world is waiting to see if you will rise to the occasion, or if you will fade into the background of the mediocre. Choose to rise, choose to play, choose to dominate. Because in the end, that is all that matters. That is the game. That is the challenge. And that is the victory. To truly grasp the magnitude of what happened in that Chicago practice gym, we have to look past the individual actions of Jordan and Harper and examine the culture they were existing within. This wasn't just a gym, it was a laboratory. It was a place where Jordan was actively engineering a culture of dominance. Every drill, every scrimmage, every one-on-one battle was a deliberate step in that engineering process. Jordan knew that a team is only as strong as its weakest link, and he was determined to identify, stress, and either repair or break those links until only the strongest remained. Ron Harper, in his arrogance, had provided Jordan with the perfect opportunity to stress test the entire organization's commitment to excellence. By humiliating Harper, Jordan wasn't just sending a message to the rookie, he was sending a message to every other player in the room. He was saying, look at what happens when you think you can take a shortcut. Look at what happens when you think you can challenge the standard. Look at what happens when you forget that this is a professional arena, not a playground. This environment, while harsh, was the incubator for the 6 championships that would follow. It created a level of mental toughness that became the hallmark of the Chicago Bulls dynasty. You didn't just walk onto the court with Jordan, you entered into a covenant. You entered into an agreement that you would match his intensity or you would be cast aside. There was no middle ground. You were either part of the fire or you were burned by it. And that fire, that unrelenting pressure, is what made the Bulls the most successful team of the 1990s. It is easy for us, from the safety of our homes, to judge Jordan's actions. We can call them bullying, we can call them unnecessary, we can call them cruel. But we must also ask ourselves, what is the cost of greatness? What is the price of perfection? Can you achieve the kind of dominance that Jordan achieved without making sacrifices that would be unacceptable to the average person? Can you reach the pinnacle of human performance without being willing to step on toes, to break spirits, and to push people beyond the boundaries of their comfort zones? The answer is almost certainly no. Greatness requires a departure from the norm. It requires a willingness to be misunderstood, to be disliked, and to be feared. It requires a singular, almost tunnel-visioned focus on the goal. And while we don't have to be tyrants to be great, we do have to be willing to demand the absolute best from ourselves and from those around us. We have to be willing to hold the line. We have to be willing to set the standard and then defend it, no matter the cost. In our own lives, we may not be playing for NBA championships. We may not be playing for $50,000, but we are playing for something just as important. We are playing for the integrity of our own work. We are playing for the quality of our relationships. We are playing for the legacy of our own character. And in each of these arenas, we are faced with our own Ron Harpers. We are faced with our own moments of doubt, our own temptations to cut corners, our own invitations to lower our standards. When those moments come, we should remember the lesson of the gym. We should remember that excellence is not an accident. It is a choice. It is a choice made in the face of challenge. It is a choice made when the easy path is available, but the hard path is necessary. As we look back on the story of the rookie and the king, we should not just see a story about basketball. We should see a story about the fundamental tension of the human experience, the tension between where we are and where we want to be, between the reality of our limitations and the potential of our ambition, between the fear of failure and the hunger for success. Jordan showed us that the bridge between those two states is paved with preparation, intensity, and an unshakable belief in one's own capability. He showed us that the only way to silence the critics, to beat the challengers, and to win the bet is to be so undeniably good that there is no argument left to be made. So, go out and be good. Go out and be undeniably good. Go out and refine your craft until it shines with the brilliance of a diamond. Go out and face your challenges with the steady hand of a master. And remember, whenever you feel the urge to doubt, whenever you feel the urge to settle, whenever you feel the urge to take the shortcut, the court is waiting, the game is on, and you are the only one who can decide how you are going to play.